All right, welcome in everybody to the deep dive. We've got a really good one today, one that, well, I think a lot of you are probably familiar with this story on at least some level, but we're going to dive deep into it. We're talking about the story of Frank Abagnale Jr., Catch Me If You Can, the book, the movie,
Oh yeah, quite a tale.
a very Hollywood story, wild, lots of twists and turns. But we're going to be looking at, the man, the myth, the legend, and really kind of pulling back the curtain and seeing how much of this is actually true.
Exactly. And for this deep dive, we've actually put together quite a bit of information, with a key source being the Wikipedia page on Frank Abagnale. Now, just to kind of give you a little context, Wikipedia is basically like this big uh, gathering of information from various sources, kind of compiling all that. So what we're going to be doing today, just for you, is dissecting this famous narrative, right?
Mm.
Holding his widely publicized claims up against, what the documented facts actually say. We've got a lot of doubts that have been raised over the years. Really try to kind of distinguish between the thrilling tales and the more grounded reality.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting to start with that point, right? Because on the surface, like it's an incredible story. It's one of those things that kind of captivates you, pulls you in. And so to sort of like start peeling that back and seeing what's actually there, I think is going to be really fascinating for people.
Yeah, and it's not to say that there isn't truth to some of these stories. It's just about kind of separating what's been embellished, what's been fabricated,
Mm.
and what might actually be rooted in reality.
Yeah. All right, so let's start to unpack this a little bit. So early on, Frank Abagnale Jr., he did attract attention for some acts of fraud, right? That
Right.
that seemed to target, individuals, smaller businesses. We're talking about things like, bouncing checks, petty theft, kind of in his younger years. So there is that like seed of something going on there.
Yeah, yeah. And our research actually points to some of this early activity.
Uh-huh.
Like even back when he was 15, there was an incident with stolen gasoline credit cards. His father ended up being responsible for that. And then, later on there were arrests for, minor theft, even impersonating a police officer with what turned out to be a toy gun. There's also evidence pointing to him stealing a car, using stolen checks to finance a cross-country trip, which ultimately led to an FBI arrest in California back in '65.
But then the story really kind of shifts gears, right? We get these much bigger, more elaborate claims coming out. And so, we hear about him impersonating, professionals. We're talking about uh, an airline pilot, doctor, lawyer, the list goes on. And so I think this is where it gets really interesting for our listeners, because this is where the truthfulness of these later, more celebrated claims is really brought into question.
Yeah, and what's fascinating here is this emergence of, significant doubt. And this was particularly brought to light by an author named Alan C. Logan. Back in 2020, he published this book called The Greatest Hoax on Earth. And he really dug deep into the inconsistencies in the narrative, presented some compelling evidence that suggested a large part of Abagnale's more elaborate stories weren't just exaggerated. They were essentially fabricated from the ground up. And importantly for our listeners to note, Logan's findings have since been independently corroborated by journalist Javier Leiva.
And Abagnale himself, he's even touched on this, hasn't he?
He has.
I recall reading something about him admitting to at least some level of over dramatization, right, on his website.
That's right. That's right. Back in 2002, he did acknowledge on his website that certain facts were over dramatized or exaggerated,
Mm.
although he remained kind of vague on the specifics, on the details. But this admission, of course, it became after these extraordinary claims had already been widely circulated, widely accepted for decades.
So let's, I guess, dive into some of these questionable professional impersonations, and I think that the one that really sort of like soars into the public consciousness is the airline pilot.
Right.
The millions of air miles traveling the world for free. It's quite a vivid picture.
Yeah, the claim of impersonating a Pan Am pilot, it's certainly central to the Abagnale legend, as you said. Our research actually shows that his initial arrest at age 17 was actually connected to theft of checks. And it was after this that he informed the media that he was a graduate of an American Airlines pilot school, right before being arrested again for more check theft. And we also found evidence that he did obtain a pilot's uniform from a Manhattan company by using forged checks. So, there are elements of truth to some of these stories.
So the sequence of events, I guess, for the listener to keep in mind is a bit out of order compared to, the more glamorous tales.
Precisely. And while While, this image of him racking up millions of air miles is certainly captivating, later questions have arisen regarding the extent and the specific details of this alleged impersonation. We know that he was arrested multiple times during the period he claimed to be a pilot, both before and after his time in Great Meadow Prison, uh, for, those check forgeries. Even immediately after his release from prison, he went right back to using a pilot disguise in Baton Rouge, which led to further arrests for theft and forgery.
Okay, so next up, we have the claim of Assistant State Attorney General in Louisiana. That's quite a career jump from being a pilot, even a fake one.
It is indeed. Uh, Abagnale claimed to have worked in Louisiana for a year, even stating that he passed the bar exam, successfully closed 33 cases.
Uh,
However, this claim has been directly refuted.
mm.
The Louisiana State Bar Association, which, for your understanding, is the official organization that licenses and regulates attorneys in the state, so their lack of a record is definitive,
Mm.
has no record of him ever being a member. Furthermore, the Attorney General's office in Louisiana has found no evidence whatsoever of him ever being employed there.
And there's even a more direct challenge to this claim, isn't there? Something about him not being able to answer basic questions.
What's fascinating here for your listeners to consider is that when Abagnale appeared on The Tonight Show, the then first Assistant Attorney General in Louisiana, a man named Ken Dijon, actually provided a reporter with specific questions to ask Abagnale about the then Attorney General, Jack P.F. Kermillian. And according to reports, Abagnale failed to answer those questions correctly, which led Dijon to famously declare that the man is not an imposter, he is a liar.
Wow. Okay. Well, moving on to another incredible claim, and this one might be hard for some of you listening to believe, but he claimed to have worked as a hospital physician, a pediatrician in Georgia, no less.
Yeah, this is another claim that really falls apart when you look closely at the evidence. Abagnale stated that he worked the midnight to 8 a.m. shift at Cobb General Hospital in Marietta, Georgia, where he supposedly supervised residents and nurses. He even claimed that he would memorize medical journals to kind of pull this off.
But the hospital's own administrators completely denied this, didn't they?
They did. They did. They informed journalist Ira Perry that no such overnight pediatrician role existed at the hospital during that time. And there was certainly no midnight to 8 a.m. shift, as Abagnale described. Moreover, Alan C. Logan, in his thorough research in the New York State Archives, he uncovered records showing that Abagnale was actually incarcerated in Great Meadow Prison in New York during the very period he claimed to be working as a pediatrician in Georgia.
So, I mean, a crucial takeaway here for you listening is that this isn't just like, a minor memory slip or something like that.
Right.
We have concrete evidence of him being in prison during the time when he's claiming to be, saving lives as a pediatrician. However, the Wikipedia page, it does mention an incident at the University of Arizona where he did impersonate a doctor.
That's an important distinction. In 1970, at the University of Arizona, Abagnale did present himself as both a pilot and a doctor. He interacted with female students, claiming to be recruiting flight attendants for Pan Am, and even conducting physical examinations. So while this doesn't align with this full-fledged year-long pediatrician role, it does indicate that he did engage in medical impersonation in some capacity.
Hmm.
And it's also worth noting the later regret expressed by a Louisiana State University journalism professor who reported on Abagnale for not confronting him on what now appears to be bragging about sexual abuse during these examinations.
Yeah. Okay. And then there's the claim of being a sociology professor at Brigham Young University. So quite academic.
It does sound that way. Abagnale claimed to have taught at BYU for 2 semesters. However, when challenged by a journalist in 2006, his story began to shift. He initially claimed that he couldn't recall the specifics, suggesting that maybe his co-author might have exaggerated things. But the journalist presented evidence, including Abagnale's own words in the book tie into the movie, and even in the film credits themselves, where he made this claim of being a BYU professor. He eventually conceded that he might have been a guest lecturer, which, as you can see, is quite different from holding a professorship for 2 full semesters.
Yeah. So it really does seem like there's a consistent pattern of significant contradictions and fabrications kind of woven throughout this whole narrative. Let's move on to some of the, I guess, more blatant ones. For example, the number of times he claims to have been arrested. Like that's one that's just very cut and dry.
This is a key discrepancy for your listeners to understand. Abagnale has repeatedly stated that he was arrested just once, and that occurred in France. However, Public records clearly document multiple arrests in the United States, including in New York, California, Massachusetts, Louisiana, Georgia, and Texas, in addition to the arrests in Europe.
Yeah. And what about the claims regarding who he actually defrauded? Because he often stated that he never targeted individuals directly.
This is another point where his claims directly contradict the available evidence. While he often asserted that he, quote, never ever ripped off any individuals, our research, including the information on the Wikipedia page, cites documented cases of him targeting individuals in small family-run businesses. The Baton Rouge family who took him in is a stark example of, individuals who were directly harmed by his actions.
Yeah. Okay. And then there's the daring escape from federal prison, right? I mean, this always sounded like something straight out of Hollywood itself.
Well, in a way it was, given that it didn't actually happen as he described it. Abagnale claimed he orchestrated this dramatic escape from the Atlanta Federal Penitentiary by impersonating a prison inspector. He even went so far as to say that he was the only and youngest man to escape from that prison. However, the Federal Bureau of Prisons has explicitly and unequivocally confirmed that Abagnale was never housed in the Atlanta Federal Penitentiary. So as you can imagine, an escape from a place he was never held is, to put it mildly, improbable.
Yeah, right. Okay. And then there's the whole claim about being on the FBI's 10 most wanted list, which I mean that carries a certain weight, right?
It certainly does. For years, he claimed to have been the youngest person ever to be included on the FBI's 10 most wanted list. This claim was even used in promotional material for the Catch Me If You Can film, further cementing it in the public consciousness. However, when directly questioned about this, and with clear evidence showing his absence from any such list, he eventually conceded on his own website that he was never on it.
And his relationship with the FBI also seems to have evolved quite a bit in the telling of his story.
It really has. Initially, when he first started publicizing his experiences, there was no mention whatsoever of him working with or for the FBI. But as time went on, his narrative shifted to include claims of extensive work for the Bureau, even suggesting, undercover missions that were directly assigned by the FBI director himself. He even claimed that he was granted a special, unique parole specifically to work for them. So, what this evolution of his story reveals to you is a possible attempt to legitimize his past by associating himself with, law enforcement.
Yeah, I mean it's a common thread, right? We've seen this throughout history. People who've done questionable things try to align themselves with figures of authority to kind of give themselves credibility.
Right, right. And it's worth noting that, retired FBI agents who were involved in his case or who are familiar with the Bureau's operational procedures have expressed significant skepticism, have directly contradicted many of these later claims. For example, retired agent Robert Russ Frank, whose name Abagnale reportedly used as a reference, stated unequivocally that he had never even met the man. Another retired agent, Eugene Stewart, who headed the FBI's Atlanta division during the time Abagnale claimed to be a pediatrician there, described him as a low-level criminal. And retired FBI agent Jerry Williams dismissed the idea of the FBI director directly assigning clandestine operations as nonsense. It's also notable that even Google added a disclaimer to his talks at Google Video, essentially distancing themselves from the accuracy of his described actions.
Yeah, it's interesting how even these big platforms like Google are starting to kind of step back a little bit and say, hey, we're not endorsing everything this guy is saying.
Right, exactly, and I think that's an important point for listeners to keep in mind.
So the close working relationship with the FBI, it seems to be another significant embellishment of the story. Let's talk about the autobiography itself, Catch Me If You Can, and its subsequent film adaptation. Now, Abagnale, he stated that the book over-dramatized events.
He has.
So what's the truth there?
Well, that's a claim he made later in his career, suggesting that his co-writer took significant creative liberties. However, investigative journalist Javier Leyva, he unearthed this True Detective magazine cover story from 1978, well before the publication of the autobiography, where Abagnale himself made many of these same exaggerated claims, passing the Louisiana bar exam, working as an attorney general, the pediatrician role, escaping through an airplane toilet, the Atlanta prison escape, and cashing millions in bad checks. So, this strongly suggests for you to consider that Abagnale was the originator of these embellished stories, not solely his co-author. Even Abagnale himself conceded in 2002 that the impersonations in the book were largely fabricated, and that he only impersonated certain professions for a few days at most, which directly contradicts the longer periods depicted in the book and film. But despite this admission, he often returned to the longer-term impersonation claims in his public speeches.
So it's a consistent pattern of revising the narrative to kind of suit the moment, it
But
seems.
it does seem that way.
Yeah. Okay. So, I mean, what is Frank Abagnale Jr. doing now? I mean, he remains a figure in the public eye, doesn't he?
He does. He currently runs a consulting firm called Abagnale and Associates, which focuses on document security and fraud prevention.
Hmm.
He was also appointed as the AARP Fraud Watch Ambassador back in 2015, and he co-hosts a podcast fittingly titled The Perfect Scam. So, somewhat ironically, he is now positioned as a leading authority on preventing the very types of activities he was once known for.
Yeah, and I think that in and of itself is kind of a fascinating element of this whole story. But even his current status hasn't been without its share of controversy, has it? I recall hearing about some issues with ethics awards and university appearances.
That's right. That's right. In 2022, Xavier University awarded him a Heroes in Ethics Award, which, as you might imagine, sparked immediate and significant controversy.
Yeah.
During the awards ceremony itself, a podcast host directly confronted Abagnale, urging him to be truthful about his past stories. Abagnale denied lying or spreading misinformation and somewhat bizarrely claimed that he had nothing to do with his own autobiography or the film adaptation. Xavier University has since removed any mention of the event from their website. And this wasn't an isolated incident. Back in the early 1980s, after some of his claims began to be debunked, several universities actually canceled his scheduled appearances, and one even requested that he sign a legal affidavit attesting to the truthfulness of his stories, which he ultimately refused to do. He even stated at one point that, profiting from his criminal past by speaking at colleges was wrong.
Yeah, it's interesting this sort of like push and pull between the image he's trying to portray and the reality of his
Yeah.
past. And what about the claims he's made regarding his current business ventures and his supposed technological innovations?
Yeah, he is often claimed to have earned substantial amounts of money, millions, in fact, from patents that he supposedly holds related to secure documents. However, a thorough search of the United States Patent and Trademark Office website, which, for your understanding, is the official government body that records all patents, so their database is the authoritative source, reveals no patents held by him or his company, nor is he listed as an inventor on any patent. Furthermore, publicly available records indicate that he and his wife actually filed for bankruptcy in 1991, claiming significant debts at the time.
So, to summarize for you,
Yeah.
based on the information that we've carefully examined, there appear to be significant and consistent discrepancies between, this widely accepted and popularized story of Frank Abagnale Jr. and, the documented facts that we've been able to uncover.
Yeah.
Many of his most famous and captivating claims, of these long-term, high-profile professional impersonations and daring escapes, they seem to be largely unsubstantiated or directly contradicted by solid evidence.
Exactly. What becomes clear when we really delve into the available sources is this long-standing pattern of exaggeration and in many cases, outright fabrication that stretches back decades, predating even the publication of his autobiography. The narrative constructed in Catch Me If You Can, while undoubtedly entertaining, commercially successful, appears to take very significant liberties with the actual truth of his experiences.
Yeah, and I think this whole exploration really underscores for you, the listener, the critical importance of approaching even seemingly established and widely known stories with a degree of healthy skepticism, right?
Mhm.
And actively seeking to verify information, especially in a world where compelling narratives can easily overshadow factual accuracy. It's a powerful reminder that a captivating story isn't always a truthful one.
Yeah, and this raises, I think, a really important question, for you to consider as you go about your day. Given the extensive and persistent questions surrounding Frank Abagnale Jr.'s past, what does this tell us about the inherent power of storytelling and the seemingly universal human desire for these extraordinary, almost unbelievable tales, right? And perhaps more importantly, how do we as individuals who listen to and consume information, how do we strike a responsible balance between our, natural inclination towards entertainment and the fundamental pursuit of truth and verifiable facts. It's definitely something worth reflecting on.
Absolutely. Well, on that note, we're going to wrap it up there for today.
Great discussion.
Thanks to everyone for joining us on the deep dive. Until next time, keep questioning, keep exploring, and keep diving deeper.
Take care.
All right.